This is Greg Patterson, and on this edition of Arkansas AgCast, we're talking with Amanda McWhirt, who's an assistant professor and extension specialist for the University of Arkansas's Division of Agriculture. She is a fruit and vegetable production specialist. And Amanda, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg.
Some questions. Obviously, there's a lot going on out there as people are having to deal with the COVID virus and everything that's thrown at them, as well as other things. And one of the typical things farmers deal with, especially in the fruit and vegetable side of things, is poor weather. And last week we had some frost. What was your take when you talked to folks about the frost? Much damage?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We really, unfortunately, wound up having kind of two separate events. We had one kind of midweek on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, and then there was actually another one Friday evening, I believe, Saturday morning for most of the northwest corner. And so, from talking to people, the first one I think was a little bit more mild, depending on where you're at in the state. Lows got down to about 35, 36, and then in some places in the far northwest all the way down to closer to below freezing. Our crops vary a lot in the stage of development that they were in, but most crops, as long as we stay above freezing, no matter what stage they're at from bloom to small fruit, are going to be okay. So we were really only worried about things like strawberries that were still blooming, blackberries, blueberries that were blooming, especially up in the northwest corner. But then I've since heard that that second event that happened later in the week actually got a little bit cooler than that first event. And so now I'm worried and hearing from growers that we might have actually had a little bit more significant damage to things even like peaches. Peaches were at well past bloom and starting to set small green fruit. And those kinds of things are typically damaged at just below freezing, so around 28 or so Fahrenheit. And from talking to growers, it sounds like in some places it did dip that low, and if not lower, particularly on some ground, it's of lower elevation. So it's still to be seen, I think, as we're just talking about this, early in the week following. But fortunately, I think most of our growers who were a little bit further south from there escaped those two events pretty well, as long as, especially on strawberries, if they were able to cover with row covers. Still kind of a moving target. Unfortunately, I do think we did see some damage on kind of a range of crops from strawberries to peaches, but we'll see the extent of that in the coming weeks.
Now, I also heard some reports, and I think you might have too, in regards to some hail that came through as well. And what kind of damage does that cause, let's say, to strawberries?
Yeah. Unfortunately, several of our strawberry growers, I think, got hit with hail. And right now is a really tender point in the crop. It's always not ideal that the plants get hit with hail, but we had a lot of berries that were red and ready to be harvested, and a lot of small green fruit that were about to size up that got hit. So, in that scenario, you are losing the fruit that's coming off now, and then you're already having fruit that would be coming off in the next week to two that's already been damaged as well. Now, sometimes some of that fruit will kind of scar over, and you may be able to talk with your consumer, especially if you're kind of marketing locally, that, we had this event, and that's why we're seeing this damage on the fruit. But particularly with soft fruit like strawberries, they tend to, once they have that open wound in the fruit, that just opens them up to all kinds of other secondary fungal infections that are then going to lead to fruit. So in that kind of scenario, it's pretty devastating for a strawberry grower to get hit with hail during that time period, because it really wipes you out of having a crop that you can really sell for a premium price for several weeks. But hopefully some of those growers will be able to harvest that crop and maybe, if the crop is in usable condition, use it for some kind of value-added product potentially.
And what would some of those products be, Amanda?
Yeah, so that would be things like, jams, jellies, pies, anything like that, where, you're taking that raw product and transforming it in some way so that it's typically going to have a better shelf life. So it's a nice opportunity for growers to, use some of their crop and create a product that they can sell in the off season.
Yeah, exactly. And even though you have culls like that, there is still a use. It's a matter of timing, as you say, though, because if you have open wounds on the fruit themselves, then, that's got to be made into those value-added products very quickly.
Exactly, yeah.
How about from a vegetable perspective? A lot of the stuff is just poking its head above ground or coming out of, high tunnels to get put in the ground. Did you hear anything about vegetation? And also, South Arkansas had a lot of high wind damage as well, and we all know that South Arkansas is famous for the Arkansas tomatoes.
Exactly. Yeah, I haven't heard too much from many of our vegetable growers yet, but you bring up a really good point. We've had kind of an earlier warm-up this season where it got warm, 2 to 3 weeks ago, warm enough that people were starting to think about putting stuff into the ground. And so in some cases, some of our warm season crops have already been out for a little bit of time. And then we had this cold event that came in afterwards. And as you say, with kind of some other extreme weather as well. And so, I know me being, a home gardener, I was really excited to get my tomato transplants out there, but luckily I was able to wait. But I know some other people were not quite so lucky. And, it really depends on what you have available and kind of where you were at in the state and how cold it got and what you were able to do. But, you can always use some kind of row cover on a small scale to protect some of those transplants. But, of course, you start getting hail or excessive wind, that can really dry out young transplants pretty quickly.
Going back to frost, tell the listeners what kind of damage you were mentioning. We don't know the extent yet because we're just starting to see what happened, but maybe give some examples of some of the popular fruits and what kind of damage is seen once frost hits.
Yeah, so typically what we're looking for when we're trying to identify that some kind of cold damage has occurred is that we're looking for tissues to turn black or dark brown, and that kind of indicates that the tissues have died. So on a strawberry or a blackberry, when the blooms are completely open, it's usually really easy to see it because the center of the bloom is where the berry is going to be produced. And so on a strawberry, typically the center is yellow, and then on a blackberry, typically the center is kind of a greenish color. And when we have cold damage occur, the centers of those blooms where the berry is going to be produced are damaged such that they turn black. So we typically refer to it kind of as a black eye because it's really striking. In other cases, on like small green peach fruit that are just starting to form, we typically don't see a strong appearance on the outside, but if you cut open and pull off some of those little green fruit and cut them open, you'll see some darkening in the center. And the same is true for things like blueberry blossoms or even small strawberry buds, where, you don't really see the internal part where the strawberry or the fruit is going to form. But if you cut those open, what you really typically want to see is nice green uniform color. And if you see any kind of darkening, generally at the center, that's going to indicate that some kind of cold damage occurred. And very likely that blossom was damaged such that it was not going to produce a berry or fruit.
In your opinion, based on where we are right now, we're towards the moving towards the end of April now. What's your overall assessment of the fruit and berry and small vegetable industry for the small farmers in Arkansas moving forward?
Yeah, we think about the season so far, all of the other issues that are happening in the world with COVID-19. Think about the warm temperatures we had and then the colds. It's been a rough start to 2020. And really, even for strawberry crops, it stretches back into 2019 when we had a freeze around Veterans Day. That was kind of the first really cold temperatures that we got last fall. And a lot of our strawberry crops really hadn't hardened off at all and weren't ready to go into dormancy. And that cold temperatures, if you didn't have your plants covered, actually damaged some of those young plants. And kind of from a lot of what we saw was the plants just didn't have enough time in the fall to really get good size. They didn't establish very well. And so that's kind of led us to where we are now in the season where, I would say most plants have recovered, and especially if you were using row cover, there's still good crop potential out there. It's just been, one factor right after the other that's really been interesting this year. And so I think, trying to make predictions is always a tricky thing about where things are going. And I think it's really spotty depending on where you're at in the state, what your local marketing strategy is like, et cetera. But I think there's still some potential for good strawberry, blueberry, blackberry, peach crops out there. Definitely some growers will have taken losses. Hopefully, those will be losses that they'll be able to recover from into the future. Unfortunately, with everything going on, it's a tough time to be a farmer, and definitely a tough time to be a fruit farmer.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the point about a frost that occurred, I guess, back in November. Because, for the most part, when we're thinking about strawberries, we're only thinking about strawberries, the consumer is when they're ready to eat.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the weather that surrounds that time period. And it just goes to show that with crops like that, it's a year-round issue, and something that happens way far away from the actual harvest can have an effect on what's going to happen the following year during that harvest time. So that's a good point you're making there. What about as far as, you talk to a lot of growers, specialty growers, whether it's fruit, vegetables, whatever they're doing. How are they having to adjust with this COVID-19 issue? Because, you have farmers markets and some are open and some aren't. You have farm to school programs while school's closed. What are your conversations with them like?
Yeah, when this whole pandemic was first starting to emerge, a lot of growers were really nervous because of the issues that you brought up, that, some of their traditional stable markets like farmers markets or farm to school were pretty early on being disrupted. And some of those things are still we'll see how the farmers markets play out over the season. I know my colleague Ron Rainey has been working with a lot of the farmers markets to kind of survey them and see what their plans are for opening or staying closed, or kind of still watching to see what happens. But one thing that I've noticed about a lot of our growers is that they were, very quick to try and find new ways to get their product out into our communities. And it's been really, admirable to kind of watch and see how quickly some of our growers have been able to adapt to this changing market that they have available to them. And so, everything from people switching to focusing a lot more on their farm stand, to switching to an online market where they're kind of allowing people to pre-order kind of a basket of produce that they want, and then they have a couple of times a week where they're available to come pick up that basket, to, all kinds of different ways that people are finding to try and still get their product to their communities. And, from talking to a lot of our growers, it sounds like, one of our biggest fears was that we would have all this product, but there wouldn't be a demand. And up until this point, I have not really heard that. It sounds like, people are still wanting to buy local Arkansas fresh produce. And so that's been really encouraging that, growers are maybe having to adapt in how they're selling that produce, but there's still that demand there. So we'll see how that plays out over the season.
Human nature is you have a tendency to do things the way you've always done them, especially if they're successful. And so in this particular case, folks have really got to think outside the box and try some things that they probably hadn't tried before. So, looking further on out into the future, maybe what happens is you have a group of growers that has actually tried and taken on new ways to do things to combine with old ways that were successful before, and maybe broaden their whole horizon.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I'm hopeful that, of good things come out of this in terms of thing to us all to learn, and that there's new ways that we could be doing things. And I think some of our growers are seeing that there's new ways that they could be marketing. They're just as effective. And so hopefully we all take something good away from this.
Now, one of the things we've learned, obviously, with the COVID-19 thing is you don't come up with a vaccine immediately. It takes 12, 18 months, 2 years, sometimes 4 years. Hopefully it won't take that long. And the same thing is true in the perspective of what y'all do in Extension with the research that you do to try and find better ways of doing things for growers, better varieties of plants. And I don't think I've ever talked to the specialty crop growers who don't sing high praises of you and your colleagues for the work that's done by the university system to help them. Tell us some of the things that you're doing research-wise now.
Yeah, no, we are trying to be just as nimble as the growers in terms of changing how we are doing extension and doing research to meet their needs. On the extension side of things, we actually just held yesterday our first virtual strawberry field walk. So this was originally intended to be an in-person walk through our research plots at the Vegetable Research Station in Kibler outside of Fort Smith. And of course, with social distancing rules, we weren't able to actually bring people together at the station. And so instead, we ended up doing a virtual walkthrough where we actually recorded video. So you got the feeling that you got to walk through and see all of our research plots, where we have, a variety trial where we're looking at 9 different strawberry varieties side by side. We have some pest management trials where we're looking at new products that are on the market for control of botrytis. That can contribute to crop nutrition. And I know we have pretty good attendance. I think we were close to a little over 90 people that came. And then we also recorded it, so it's going to be available on YouTube. So we're looking forward to kind of seeing grower feedback from that, if that's a useful way for growers to see our research. On the research side, we have all kinds of ongoing projects, and possibly several of them where we'll be showcasing in future virtual field walks later this summer if we're not able to actually get growers out into the field and show them. We have ongoing research looking at rotating cross-arm trellising for blackberries, and that's showing some really promising results in terms of improving yields per plant and possibly having some effects on improving quality. We have a hops trial also at the Fruit Research Station. We had a really nice workshop on that last year, and we're planning to have another one this year. It's in its second year, and so we'll be having our second harvest off of it, and we're evaluating several different cultivars of hops and different fertility management programs, and actually even different trellising programs for hops, with the idea that hops could be a new crop for growers in Arkansas, and they could feed in to our local brewery market. So those are just some of the research we have going on. Of course, there's all kinds of little projects that we have going with growers and on a range of different crops.
Now, I was fortunate enough to be able to, quote unquote, attend the workshop yesterday. I sat down in front of my laptop and watched you all do it. And of course, that was a innovative way to, of course, I love being outdoors and going to the actual workshops, when y'all hold them, because I get to meet the growers one-on-one. But I thought it was really good. And, I picked up some stuff myself that I didn't know as well. And it was good to see y'all go through the different varieties, and give the growers the latest information on the strawberry varieties that y'all are doing your work on. Do you see that, even when we come out of this COVID issue of being able to do more online things as well as the live ones once they get started again?
Yeah, I think from talking to some of our growers, typically when we plan those in-person type events, some of the limitations to attending are either distance or having other farm work that needs to be done or other jobs that need to be done. And so by making some of these things virtual, then they're archived on YouTube or available at different times, makes it available so that growers, statewide or even region-wide, can attend and see kind of up close and personal, like you're saying, we walk through and look at each one of the varieties and really talk about it. And so I do think that is an advantage, and we are looking at doing more of that. But, as you say, there's really no substitute for being there in the field and being able to put your hands on the plants and ask questions and really see it for yourself. So, yeah, I think we're gonna hopefully, depending on the feedback we get back from growers, continue kind of with a combo approach.
Well, Dr. Amanda McWhirt, who's an assistant professor and extension specialist with the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture, she's involved in fruit and vegetable production and research. You've been a great guest today. Really appreciate you coming by and having an opportunity to talk with the listeners of Arkansas AgCast.
It's always my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Greg.